Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It is 1:15, guys. It's post-lunch, and I know the feeling. We just had lunch, and I was hoping there was going to be coffee, Colleen. But I had a joke about we're ready, we're caffeinated, getting educated, and going to be taking pictures later. That's a joke for Ms. Wilson. But we have a very exciting panel for you today, and I promise to keep you awake, and I promise to keep you engaged. A little bit about myself. My name is Juliana Vasquez. I work at Resilient Cities Network. I work specifically on the impacts of flood and heat in the communities of Houston and communities in Boston. I'm also the co-founder of Women of Color Collective in Sustainability. So if you want to nerd out about women in climate or the lack of visibility, or you want to nerd out about flood and heat, please come to me. I'm easy to find. The place here, it's quite colorful, so please find me after. So a little bit about the panel. It's titled Urban Tree Canopies to Mitigate Heat, and I do expect our panelists to mention a couple of heat-related puns. They will presenting the implication of the urban heat island effect and share the latest findings on health impacts and surface temperature trends. One thing I do want to do a little different, I mentioned before that each panelist was going to talk for 10 minutes in the presentation, but I really like the format of the last panel, and I'm thinking we are going to go through presentations one by one, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience and questions from our virtual audience as well. And then I will sacrifice some of my reactions and reflections and really allow the time and space for the audience to take that space. With that said, I do want to read the bios of our panelists today, and I'll be super brief, but I definitely want to make sure that I do pronounce your names right, and I do mention that you're a doctor. So the first panelist here is Dr. Ariane Mado from Arizona State University. Dr. Ariane research lies in the interdisciplinary field of urban climate, with focus on climate-sensitive urban form, design landscapes, and infrastructure in the face of extreme heat and climate uncertainty. For the past decade, Mado has advanced the field of urban climate science through applied and solution-oriented research, employing quantitative and qualitative field observations, local and macro-scale climate modeling, and geovisualization to investigate sustainability challenges related to heat, thermal exposure, water use, energy use, and human climate interactions in cities. Our second panelist is Dr. Matthew Browning. He is the founding director of the Virtual Reality in Nature Lab and associate professor in the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management at the Clemson University. It's a globally recognized scholar investigating the impacts of nature on human health. His research aims to optimize nature-based solutions, measure nature exposure, and promote sustainability in nature-human interactions through technology. He has authored over 100 peer-reviewed publications and is ranked among the most productive and cited researchers in the fields of park, recreation, and health based on recent PubMed metrics. He also acts as a scientific advisor for Nature Quant, developer of the personalized nature prescription app Nature Dose TM, and examples of his recent work include the role of virtual reality in hospice care and disaster readiness. Then we have Sharon Danks for Green Scholar America. Sharon is an environmental city planner, social entrepreneur, and author who has worked to build and shape the Green Scholar field for more than 20 years. She founded Green Schoolyards America in 2013 and leads the organization as its chief executive officer. Over the last 2 decades, her career has focused on transforming school grounds into vibrant, nature-rich public spaces that engage the community and nurture children as they learn and play. Her work is grounded in ecological design, green infrastructure, and environmental policy, and is driven by a sense of urgency to improve equitable access to green space and protect children from the increasing effects of climate change. Woo. All right. And then we have Ryan Knox. Ryan Knox is a skilled and dedicated senior urban forester serving the city of Tampa with his expertise in managing urban forestry. With over 10 years of experience in the field, Brian's knowledge and passion for trees have made him an invaluable asset to the city by enhancing the urban environment through sustainable tree management practices. Holding a master's degree in urban forestry from the Southern University, Brian's educational background has helped him navigate various disciplines of urban forestry. Equipped with his advanced degree, Brian provides insights into the complexity of urban ecosystems and the critical role trees play in improving air quality, reducing urban heat island effects, and promoting overall environmental well-being by representing the city of Tampa in various capacity. So there you have it. I will start first presentation with Ms. Ariane, please. Take the stage. Clap, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jordana. So I am going to now transport you to the southwest of the United States, where things are much, much different from the northeast, which we've heard in previous talks. And welcome to the hot topic. So you were just promised some puns. I'm trying to deliver. This is just to give you a sample of Phoenix, Arizona from this past summer. It has been a record-breaking summer for us. We broke every single record on the heat books. We had 55 days over 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The prior record was 53 days from 2020. Before that, the record was somewhere in the 30s. We had a 31-day stretch in July with just those temperatures of over 110. We had average daily temperatures in July of over 102.7. Same in August, was fairly hot. And then we also, notably, we broke the record for the warmest summer low, 97 degrees Fahrenheit. So that means that the temperatures at night would not drop below 97 degrees Fahrenheit. So as you can see, these are pretty harsh conditions, not just for people, but also for the trees. And there are... Oh, you want me to switch this on? Okay, sorry. Okay, now I'm double mic'd. So these are very harsh conditions for our trees, and there are a lot of challenges that come with planting trees and under these harsh conditions. First of all, the heat and the radiative stress to the trees, because when it's extremely hot, at some point trees shut down their stomata, so they want to conserve water, so they're not actually evapotranspirating and cooling the environment. The only cooling benefit we get in Phoenix from trees when it's really hot is essentially from the shade of the tree, and that's a very hyperlocal benefit. It's essentially just underneath the tree. Also, trees use a lot of water. All our trees are usually irrigated unless we have some native species, so we need a lot of water to sustain our urban forest, and water is a really, really scarce resource for us in the desert. We have a monsoon season in Phoenix or in Arizona. Usually starts in mid-June and June and extends into September. And we experience a lot of microbursts during this period. A microburst is a vertical downpour of wind, and then once the wind hits the ground, it doesn't have anywhere to go, so it goes sideways and it uproots all our trees. There's the picture in the middle here is the tree of our neighbor. It was a really huge pine tree, and it got uprooted, and the roots were actually taller than everybody else. Everybody took selfies with that tree when this happened. We also have urban infrastructure challenges, and that's what any city experiences. There are sewer lines underground, there are internet cables, there are power lines above ground. So there's not a lot of space for cities to actually plant those trees. Our cities in the Southwest, and specifically in the Phoenix metro area, many of them have urban forestry plans. Those plans usually account for or call for 25% tree canopy cover. For some time in the future, Phoenix's plan wants to achieve 25% by 2030. Tempe has a similar plan, 25% by 2040. There's a map here of the most recent tree canopy cover for the Phoenix, for the city of Phoenix, and it's estimated on average to be 12.4%, and then Tempe is a similar range, it's 11.4% current tree canopy cover. So you can see that essentially doubling the canopy cover within the next 10 to 20 years is a really, really ambitious goal. The city of Phoenix has just started their Cool Corridor program. That's a program where they would like to make the city more walkable and cooler for residents. So the idea is that you should live within a cool corridor of like maybe 15 to 20 minute bike, walk, or bus ride. And then these cool corridors have all kinds of cooling amenities, and one of the cooling amenities that the city envisions is to plant trees in these areas, and they already started. They got $1.4 million to assist with this tree planting, they're planning on planting 1,800 new trees. It's nothing compared to 1 million trees, but it's a good start. And I read they just got $10 million yesterday to increase this program and plant more trees. So now with these restrictions, municipalities are really starting to rethink their strategy. And trees provide shade, and they're really important for the urban environment. But cities are more and more thinking more broadly about shade infrastructure, because shade can come from anything, right? Shade can come from a building, shade can come from an awning, from an umbrella. You can bring your own shade. You can wear a hat. So there are various ways we can provide shade. And so essentially, it's not just the right tree for the right place, but the right shade for the right place. This is a commentary that we published in Nature recently with a colleague from UCLA, Kelly Turner. She was the lead. And this illustration shows you the benefit of shade. So you see this person that's not under the bus shelter, standing in the middle of the sun, gets hit by the shortwave radiation from the sun. The radiation from the sun also hits the ground. The ground heats up. The ground emits long-wave radiation towards the body of that person. There's also some reflection of the shortwave because maybe the person is standing over cool pavement, which has a really high albedo. So this person experiences heat load from all directions, but then if you have this other person to the left, it's standing under the shade of a bus shelter. So the person does not experience the incoming shortwave radiation from the sun because that hits the bus shelter. The shelter heats up a little bit, so there's a little bit of long-wave radiation hitting the person's body, but also there's less of the radiation coming off of the ground because the ground just doesn't heat up as much. Unfortunately, as with many cities, Phoenix has a lot of shade deserts, so there are a lot of areas around the city that do not have enough shade. So now, as we talk about cooling, and especially cooling people, there are different ways to cool, and there are different metrics to use. And so my research is mostly about how people are affected by heat, not so much how buildings are affected by heat, for example. And so when you talk about people, not all of the heat metrics out there are really relevant. Air temperature, that's a metric we're all familiar with, because if you look at the weather forecast, that's what they tell you. Tomorrow is going to be 90 degrees Fahrenheit. But air temperature does not really vary a lot throughout the urban environment. Maybe 2 degrees, 3 degrees. We saw an example of 4 degrees Fahrenheit earlier. So maybe it's 110 in Scottsdale, which is a really green area in Phoenix, and then it's 113 at the airport, which is a very asphalty area. But air temperature does not vary a lot. It doesn't tell you where the hot spots are. So a lot of people, in order to find these hot spots, have used surface temperature maps. And we've seen some today already. We're probably going to see some more in this panel discussion here. Surface temperature gives you a much better idea of where the hot spots are. Usually the resolution is much higher than the air temperature as well. But it, again, does not really reflect the heat that a person experiences. I'll give you an example. So if you look at a surface temperature map of a golf course, you'll see that the irrigated grass looks like it's very, very cold. If you're a person in Phoenix playing golf on that golf course, you get hit by the direct sunlight. That increases the heat load by almost 50%, and you feel really hot, although the surface temperature map thinks, oh, there's grass, it's cool. If you're standing over cool pavement, the cool pavement looks a little bit cooler than asphalt on the surface temperature map, but if you're a human standing over that cool pavement, you actually get a little bit more heat load because of the added reflection from the ground. So those surface temperature maps only tell part of the story. If you look at people, what really, really matters, especially in hot, dry environments such as Phoenix, is the radiant temperature, or mean radiant temperature. And that's the radiation that hits your body from all different directions. That's, as I mentioned, the shortwave radiation, the longwave radiation. So the radiation that hits you from all sides, and that taken together gives you the radiant heat load on your body. It's different if you're in a humid environment, but for Phoenix and the Southwest, this is really the best metric to tell how hot people are. So in Phoenix, at ASU, we developed MARDI. MARDI is a biometeorological garden card. And Marty can measure this radiant temperature. Marty has net radiometers that face in 6 directions, or 3 directions, because net radiometer looks in both directions. So it's up, down, left, right, front, back. And that taken together measures the mean radiant temperature, and that can be up to 54 degrees Fahrenheit higher when you're standing in the sun versus when you're standing, say, in the shade of a tree. So Marty has been helping us to do some measurements. And this is what we found. So this was a study that we conducted recently where we compared different shade types. You see on the x-axis, this is the reduction in the heat load, or the delta of your mean radiant temperature between a sun-exposed location and a shaded location. The blue bars are lightweight or engineered structures, so this could be anything from an awning, a pergola, an umbrella. The green bars are the trees, so we sampled various tree species. And then the gray bars are urban forms, so that means the shade could come from a building, from an awning, from an overhang, anything that's structural. We looked at 159 locations and conducted these measurements over 3 years, and we did this at 3 times of day. So there's the overall bars on the top. That's what happens during the day broadly. Then 12:30 at noon, when the sun is highest up in the sky. Then we have 3:30, which is the afternoon when the air temperature is actually close to its peak. And then after sunset at 8:30 at night. And if you look at the bars, in general, you see that the trees are doing quite well, but they're not as effective as the shade from urban form. In fact, the shade from urban form was the most effective shade in Phoenix, and then the trees and the lightweight structures were trailing a little bit behind, but overall, they still gave you a reduction of almost 20 degrees Celsius in your mean radiant temperature or in your heat load. So that means all shade is great, except at night. You see, after sunset, the bars go in the opposite direction. That means there's a little bit of heat retention going on. So if you're standing under any type of shade, the surfaces underneath don't heat up as much during the day because they're shaded most of the time, but they still heat up a little bit. And then once the sun sets, the heat is kind of trapped under the shade structure or under the tree and cannot escape easily. So that's why the bars slightly go in the other direction. But it's Marty can measure this, but it's not really going to be something that you could feel as a person when you're standing under the shade structure. So that tells you that any type of shade, not just trees, are really effective in Phoenix, and we're currently trying to scale this up. We are running a high-resolution model that can do a shade casting. This is the Phoenix metro area. This is a shade map for, I think it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This smaller area is the ASU campus, and so we can model the shade distribution and the mean radiant temperature distribution for this whole area. And then this information will directly feed into the Cool Corridor program at the City of Phoenix. In fact, we're trying to set up a meeting for later this month to get together and see how this can be done to replace some of the land surface temperature maps that they've been using so far. So with that, I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I'm pretty much good. Okay, well then, thank you so much, and I'm happy to take questions.
Can you guys hear me? Yes? 32 days of 110 degrees. Wow.
I was not there. I left Phoenix, so.
So you're telling us we should consider moving to Phoenix? Okay.
Maybe move to Flagstaff. That's higher elevation, but yeah.
I think we can go ahead and maybe our virtual audience would like to kick us off.
Sure. The first question is, what is the recommended method for measuring human experience of heat in East Coast humid cities?
That's an excellent question. So as you move towards more humid cities, you definitely want to include the humidity in your human experience. Also, the wind speed really becomes important. Mean radiant temperature alone would not be the best measure to essentially quantify the human experience. One way to go about it would be to use some sort of index that integrates all these different meteorological variables into one number. And there have been various indices developed. There's something called the UTCI or the PET, the physiological equivalent temperature. Also, there is a wet bulb globe temperature that has been used in the past. So as you move towards more humid climates, mean radiant temperature alone is not enough and may not even be the dominant driver, because at some point when it's really humid, your ability to, or your inability to sweat makes a much larger impact on your experience than the actual radiation. Also, those climates are usually a little bit more cloudy, and when it's cloudy, you don't have the incoming radiation hitting your body, so that part of MRT is essentially gone.
We have a question. We have 2 questions on that side.
Thanks for your presentation. It's very interesting, especially the shade map. So I was wondering how easy it is to apply a similar method to create shade map for other cities. Are there going to be a lot of like field observations involved in your modeling kind of thing?
You would definitely want some field observations to validate your model, because as you run a model, you always have to make sure that it's actually accurate. But to run the model, the model needs two types of input, and the model was actually not developed by us; it was developed in Sweden. So it requires weather information that could come from the closest airport, and it also requires 3D information of the urban environment so that you can do the shadow casting. And that 3D information usually comes from LiDAR data. So you take a LiDAR data set, you classify it into trees and buildings, and then you create 2 raster layers that represent these inputs, and then you can run the model.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can do one more on that side.
Hello, this is really interesting. Thank you so much for presenting. I was wondering what kind of qualitative data maybe was collected on people's experience of heat, or the infrastructure, or the infrastructural things that you're building.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So in this particular work, we looked at thermal exposure, which is objective, so it does not have any of the subjective factors that you would look at when you look at thermal comfort, for example. But we did do some prior studies on ASU's campus where we surveyed individuals, mostly students, to ask them how comfortable they felt on a scale from 1 through 9. And then we collected meteorological data along with it, and also collected personal information, what type of clothing they're wearing, or how adapted they were to the climate, and so on. And we did this study specifically to investigate what's the impact of shade on people's comfort. And the result was that when we linked the surveys and the measurements, so the subjective and the objective information, shade reduced people's heat stress or improved people's comfort by 1 point on that scale pretty much all throughout the year. And the mean radiant temperature was one of the most important factors in people's experiences from the objective factors. From the subjective factors, adaptation was really important, how used people were to the climate, and also gender was important. And there was another thing. I would have to look that up. But I can forward you the study if you're interested in that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, if you had any questions for this particular speaker, just write them down. We'll get hopefully some time at the end to address them. Thank you, Arian. And next we have Dr. Matthew Browning.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. The last time I was here was about 10 years ago, and it was probably attending a similar seminar with similarly large-sized, delicious-looking cookies. So it's really nice to have that draw me back here, as well as all the leadership from URI and from YSE. I think today is really one of the themes that I see is hope. It's been somewhat depressing with natural disasters and heat this summer, but with record investments and the innovation in this room and creativity and commitment, I really think that we can leave today with a lot of hope, and that's what I want to focus my talk around. I will say that I changed that about 20 minutes ago, so bear with me if we start off on a depressing note and move towards hope. So heat is a really real nice, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Ariana. It's a huge issue. There's record-breaking heat waves, as many people in this room knew, across the world. And I did want to emphasize that these are concentrated in countries, unfortunately, that are not the ones contributing the most to climate change. We have several colleagues in Bangladesh, and the stories they're telling us of the heat waves there are just awful. So that is a depressing note, but that doesn't mean that tree canopy cover and nature can't help with that. And I'll talk about that here in a second. I want to briefly talk about what heat does to the body. Many of us have experienced what's called heat exhaustion. I did this when I was pulling out actually invasives maybe a couple weeks ago. I live in South Carolina. It's hot and humid there, and I started feeling dizzy. I felt like I might faint. I was sweating profusely, drenched in fact, and I went inside and I had to get into air conditioning and had ice cold water. That is heat exhaustion. If you do not treat heat exhaustion, it can transcend into what's called heat stroke, and that's the severe outcomes of extended durations of heat. Some people will say 3 hours and 95-degree Fahrenheit temperature or more. And heat stroke is where it actually starts to affect your mental capacity. You start to slur your words, you start to be confused. This is particularly prevalent amongst certain vulnerable populations, pregnant women, elderly, infants. And once you reach heat stroke, it's really a concern because you are less likely to take action to get into those colder temperatures or make rational decisions. So the reason that we experience these things is our body's not meant to be that hot. Once our core temperature gets above about 104 degrees, our gut lining starts to be degraded. Our blood vessels do as well. There might be less blood flow to our head. We lose the electrolytes that are so critical to muscle functioning. So our body degrades, and that can be permanent even if you don't reach heat stroke. Or the ultimate outcome of heat stroke can be mortality, death, if it's not treated. So that's why heat is such a major issue, and many of us have experienced that. So in terms of what urban canopy can do, obviously there's evapotranspiration in those cases where that's available, and there's shade. Many of us experience that. I'm really fascinated about all the different types of shade and how maybe it doesn't matter as much. My wife as a landscape architect is going to want that paper, and that figure is brilliant. So, the estimates on how much tree canopy cover can reduce heat varies quite a bit, and I think that we've seen a lot of estimates here today. It might be 3 to 5 degrees for air temperature. For land surface temperature, it might be much more. I've seen some estimates of, around maybe 20 degrees from a totally built environment all the way up to an urban forest. But this ambient temperature is exponentially higher. It's amazing how much nature can impact our experience of heat. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, some groups are particularly vulnerable to this. I did also want to highlight the groups that we're particularly interested in with many of our greening efforts. Lower income populations and underserved populations are also vulnerable. There's a nice diagram I'm going to pull up here. These are some of the pathways that we think might lead the vulnerability to heat being in a disadvantaged community. So you can see there's many here. One is poor health status. You might be more at risk to have underlying conditions such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, asthma. All of those are risk factors also for experiencing heat exhaustion, heat stroke. Social isolation. If someone is not watching out for you, you might not be able to leave the home if you don't have air conditioning, or you might not, once you lose mental capacity to start treating heat stroke, then someone there is not there to help you get to a cooler spot. Of course, there's structural factors. There's less prevalence of air conditioning, or maybe the air conditioning is there but it's not functioning, or there's economic reasons why they can't be used. Cooling centers as well. Crime and safety, this is fascinating. So the 1995 Chicago heat wave interviewed victims of that event, and many of them did not open their windows because of, thank you, Colleen, because of perceived crime. So they didn't open their windows, they didn't leave the home, even though they were hot in the house because of crime. And of course, that is a structural factor resulting in long-term discrimination. But canopy is not the only thing that is nature. A lot of what we care about is trees. A lot of us are tree advocates. I love trees myself. I was so happy to walk around campus and see some of the big London plane trees and oak trees here. And a lot of the discourse around the health benefits of nature, which is my field, have to do with the terms green space and blue space. And so one thing I also want to emphasize is that people go to nature, people want nature, not just because of plants. East Rock Park is a great example of this. There's these beautiful rock outcroppings, and there's great outdoor recreation amenities to that, as well as aesthetic amenities. So here are 3 different ways to classify natural landscapes. I just wanted to emphasize that when you're planning for natural land management, people care about not just, open water on the coastline or lakes or streams or plants, but they often care about these intersections between them. And if you have the beautiful rocks in Central Park in New York City, for example, these can really draw people out of their homes and provide a lot of benefits. So looking at nature in bigger picture, there are these obviously heat reduction benefits, but what does that translate into people's lived experience, quality of life, and longevity? Well, this is an umbrella review that we co-authored looking at 40 other systematic reviews on this topic, and we find that living in more green areas or more natural areas transcends to a bunch of different diseases and illnesses, but then also health behaviors like better sleep and physical activity. And here's why it does that. It's not just mitigating heat. Of course, it's mitigating air pollution, it's mitigating noise. There's some people that think about artificial light at night, perhaps being reduced by canopy, but it also builds our capacity for good health. It encourages us to interact with each other. Many of us experienced this during COVID. It encouraged us to be physically active, walking down the street or more vigorous activities. And then it restores our capacity to be attentive. If we all went for a walk, I guarantee I would be doing better, you would be more attentive, many of you would be more attentive right now. It captures our indirected attention, and it allows our prefrontal cortex to have more attentional capacity for when you actually have to concentrate on someone like me. It also reduces our stress. So there's many, many mechanisms, and heat is just one of them. It's really critical with climate change, but there's many things that nature can benefit from in many different ways. And so it's important to be cognizant of all of these when designing urban green spaces. And we also find that not only do certain people benefit from, certain people are more of risk of heat stroke, but we also find that certain populations are they tend to be more, benefit more from nature exposure. So we find that lower income populations tend to benefit from living in more nature-rich areas. We think that might be because there's what's called a suppressed baseline effect, where if you already have poor health, you have more to gain from a healthy living environment. There also might be more residential immobility, so there might be less access to a private vehicle to go to somewhere else to engage in walking around in the park, for example. You might spend more time around the home. So if there is air and noise pollution there, you are exposed to it more. We also find that women tend to benefit more in terms of reduced risk of all-cause mortality and obesity from living in natural areas. And that's probably driven by societal norms, which are changing. And some of the literature is a little bit old, so it would be interesting to update this review, but we do find that effect. People living in urban cities also tend to benefit more, and that's because a lot of these factors are more important to overcome in the city. There's more stress, there's more noise, there's more air pollution, etc. In terms of age, it's hard to determine whether younger or older people benefit more from nature exposure, although we would hypothesize that nature early during the cognitive phase would be particularly important because that will translate to lifetime health and behaviors. And then really importantly is familiarity. If you are not familiar with a place, your evolutionarily response to that environment is this is threat. This is a threat. I need to be looking out for the threat. A great example of this is I love Moab, Utah. Raise your hand if you've been to Moab, Utah. It's a beautiful place. My wife hates it. She finds it very threatening and not aesthetic. I think it's because that I spent my early 20s as a park ranger there, and I encountered threat, I overcame it, and now I can appreciate the aesthetics. So nature has to be non-threatening, and it has to be perceived as restorative, and those are geographically and culturally bound. So obviously people that fall within that would benefit more. There's many efforts to overcome health inequalities through nature. One is the 330-300 rule, which suggests that there should be 3 trees visible from a home where you live, at least 30% canopy cover in your neighborhood, and living approximately 5-minute walk from a urban green space. And there's many different ways. This is a methodological paper we've written because those things are really hard to measure. And so here are some ways that can be measured. I'm happy to talk about those. And then more common in the United States is probably the 10-minute walk score, which has really been led by Trust for Public Land. Many thanks to their efforts. Is anybody from TPL in here? Excellent. Yay. So this will measure how many people are within 10 minutes of a park in urban areas, and that can be broken down by income and race and ethnicity. And then, of course, there's many initiatives. I scanned through the funding announcement yesterday. URI, I noticed one strategy might be actually paying people to plant and steward trees. So I think there's a lot of innovation in this space. And then so really quickly, I know I'm over time. The last thing I'm going to end on is, again, this hope thing. So I've been talking about health, I've been talking about heat. I want to highlight a few other studies that maybe you can take home and say, gosh, urban trees are really awesome, green space is really awesome. We just finished a U.S. Forest Service cost share grant. Thank you, Beatra, and her team for this. Working with Kaiser Permanente in Northern California, looking at the association between nature and healthcare cost. I think that I had a couple slides, but they're gone. It's fine. We are looking at, again, how much people spend on healthcare each year, and we found about $375 difference for people living in green spaces versus nature deprived areas. And that was for a very small increase in green space, which I can't show you the visuals of. We've also done research with police shootings. There's multiple databases across the United States. We find that the count of fatal police shootings in counties is lower in counties with more natural areas. And in fact, that association is stronger in the most deprived counties in the United States. So nature benefits. Probably what's happening is police officers have more attentional capacity. They might be less likely to move all the way to lethal force. And then, of course, there's fewer, the broken window theory suggests there's probably fewer, the whole community would be less likely to engage in those sorts of crimes that would elicit that behavior. And we've also done work with the Opportunity Index, which is a tract level data set, and it tracks children who grow up in low income areas and how much they're making in their 30s on their tax records, very objective data. And again, we find that children growing up in poverty can move up. It's a modest effect, but can move up in terms of social mobility if they grew up near nature. The effect is about $30,000 per year over the life course, so not a huge thing, but enough to get people's attention. So with that, I think I'll stop because I know I'm over time. Thanks for your attention. So it's hopeful. There's a lot of outcomes that we can do.
Thank you, Matthew, for a wonderful presentation. I always find it very interesting, the intersection of heat and health. And whenever I'm in a community, because I do work with both flood and heat hazards, I always ask the trivia question of, what's the #1 silent killer in the United States? And people always get it wrong. It's heat. Heat is our silent killer.
Yeah, so the estimates I've read is there has been a 50% increase in heat-related mortality amongst older adults in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
and a third of heat-related deaths are attributable to climate change. So it is quite a killer.
Well, on that note, I do want to open up for questions. We'll take one from our virtual audience and one from our in-person audience. So this side.
You had mentioned violence decreasing when there's more tree coverage, and then you said something about police, and I wasn't sure if you meant police were less likely to commit violence against the community, or that the community was less likely to commit violence, or both.
Yeah, so the database is fatal police shooting, so when a police officer shoots someone and kills them. And that's the association that we found. There's much research on, community level crime as well that complements that. Yeah.
And then we'll take one from our virtual audience.
You mentioned that women tend to show stronger effects for select outcomes. Why is that the case? What are the select outcomes?
So the outcomes are all-cause mortality and obesity. And again, we're thinking that is largely driven by social norms, which are changing. But if you are more likely to be working more hours at home or having more child-rearing responsibilities, you're more likely to be affected by the environment that you're living in. And if that's a health-promoting environment where it encourages walking outside with a stroller, and I do this myself, this is non-gendered, but engaging with other neighbors, then you'd be more likely to benefit from living in a canopy-rich area.
Wonderful. Thank you. And next we have Sharon Dex.
Thanks.
Where did the keyboard go? Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here with you today. My name is Sharon Danks with Green Schoolyards America, and we're based in Berkeley, California, and work nationally. And I also have a little bit to add at the beginning of my presentation. I've just decided fits what we're doing and will help frame it more. I'm going to be talking about, our work is fundamentally about paradigm shift, about shifting the education system from one goal to another. So I'm going to talk first about the rationale for that paradigm shift and what it is, and then about systems change, which is aligning the policy context and the processes to fit that new idea, and then last about direct service, which is more about constructing green schoolyards and schoolyard forests and the programs that support them. And I know that most funding streams fund the last part. And so I think it's really important to see this whole piece together as part of the necessary transition to a different future. So with that, I should tell you that my organization works in general on systems change and paradigm shift, and we are trying to help the country's schools switch from a standard of pavement and lawn into an ecologically rich park-style system on school grounds, on the public lands that public schools manage, in order to, so all children will have access to the natural world and the places that they already visit every day. So that's our overarching goal. And why do school grounds matter? There is really a lot of land and a lot of kids on our public school grounds. We have almost 50 million kids, and it's estimated to be thousands of square miles, around 2 million acres of public land. And we have a lot of it that looks like the picture here in our cities. And so you can see it's got no shade and it has no nature, and picture that 500 kids on that every day. Here's more pictures of just how bad the cities are, and we have such, growing up in the suburbs, I didn't understand that this was the case until I went and looked in cities, and I know many of you might have had a similar suburban upbringing. And so we do really need to fix this system, which is designed to be inequitable. It's based on property taxes, so it follows, the funding streams follow the level of funding in a community. And so part of the paradigm shift is to rethink that and think about equity. How can we make everyone's school environment a place that is nurturing and educational and happy for the children? So we are trying to have nature-rich school grounds for every child, every day. They're also We see a lot of outdated programs. Our school grounds were designed for the 1940s. We don't do the types of curriculum anymore that we had on those old grounds. It needs to shift. And again, all the land that school districts manage adds up. And it's important. They don't see themselves typically as land managers. They're not funded to be land managers. But we need to help them manage that land better collectively. This is an infrastructure problem, not a problem that can be fixed with bake sales, as it's been approached in the last couple of decades. And so what are we trying to do? We're trying to create living school grounds, which are richly layered park-like environments that strengthen local ecological systems and climate resilience, while also providing place-based, hands-on learning resources and vibrant play and social spaces for children of all ages. These environments are designed and should be designed to produce outcomes that include children's happiness, which is left off of most of our design for schools. They are places of learning that support the curriculum and hands-on engagement. They are places that promote mental and physical health for kids of all ages. They are also places that can act as green infrastructure when you design for stormwater management, wildlife habitat, climate mitigation, urban heat island issues. And so what we're working on now are schoolyard forests, which are a subset of a green schoolyard. So it's a piece of this park-like space we're trying to create. And we are ideally contiguous patches of biodiverse tree plantings that are places that kids learn and play in every day as climate oases. And they involve students' participation in the research, design, planting, and stewardship of the public land that their school manages. So it can teach democratic management of shared public space as well as forestry and all the other topics that kids are learning in their grounds. And this is also, it fits into, we're essentially trying to, I'm an environmental city planner by training, we're essentially trying to plug back in the public land that are managed by school districts into the city planning that happens, that normally has a gaping hole where all the schools are. We need to plan together for all this land that the community uses. And also just thinking about what we can do on a school ground. Historically, for the last couple of decades, we've done demonstration projects, which are very small, have good environmental literacy potential, and kids do learn from them, but we can do better. And so in this example, the one on the left, the demonstration scale project, tiny solar panel powers a pump at the school's pond. The same school has a solar array on the roof that can provide a third of the energy the school uses. And on the right is an example of the district that's trying to have all of the schools produce all of the energy, be net zero with their energy. So we want to be district scale impact, shift how the schools, what impact schools have on the community. And so you can think about those three levels in stormwater management, whether it's a tiny little system like the one here in the picture, or it's a whole landscape that's been unpaved to absorb the 10-year storm. You can have wildlife habitat that's coordinated plantings fit into regional conservation plans and goes across all the parcels in a district at the big scale, or at the small scale, tiny butterfly garden in a tiny pot, right? And then climate resilience, which is the focus of this piece, is about ecological buffering and figuring out how we can protect children from heat, how we can cool buildings and the places that kids are spending their time, and how we can adapt our school grounds from this in cities like Oakland, where this one is. There are some, I should say first that there are some schools like this one in Alameda, California, where the landscape management is not going to change things. This school is unfortunately probably in the wrong place for climate change. It was once the bay, and it will be again as sea level rises. And so the principal here had asked me, what can I do to green my grounds? And I looked at the map and said, I don't think you can. And so there's some that we need to think about migrating the school in the long term. And then others, the majority, we can do something about if we have acres and acres of asphalt. We need to help schools systematically shift their grounds from pavement into a more nature-rich environment, because millions of kids across the country don't have any shade. And even there are millions of kids in California alone that don't have any shade. And again, the equity issue is, it's the case in schools of every income level, communities of every income level, but it is the worst in underserved communities. There's an inequitably distributed tree canopy at our schools. And it also, as previous speakers have said, falls hardest on communities with the fewest resources. So we've been measuring temperatures, and I know surface temperature is only a portion of the issue, but there are a lot of bad material choices happening on our school grounds, and we see schools relying on the most common materials, which are what you put in if you want to make them hotter. You put in plastic grass, which I won't call turf because that's a marketing term. I don't market it. So plastic grass, asphalt, and rubber. Rubber is the worst. That we've recorded at 166 degrees on multiple times on even a cooler day. So, and just a quick visual of a thermal picture. You can see the white hot rubber next to the less hot red bit there of the pavement. And so these numbers I think are a little low actually, but it shows you more the relative situation. With an 81 degree day, you have super hot rubber, less hot pavement, and then cooler than air temperature, or just slightly warmer than air temperature in the grass on the surface. And similarly, the effects that shade has to drop the surface temperature below the air temperature in this example. And so shade matters, materials matter. And then put that in context of, we know we've been doing research with partners at Green Info Network on tree canopy, and we see that there's less than 9% tree canopy across California school grounds, so 2 million kids have no shade. And the trees, even those trees are not above the kids, they're at the edge. And so we are working on direct action of transforming, of how do we, thinking about the system. So the first piece, all that was just the paradigm shift, the context, what we're doing, and I'll be quick on the rest of it. But the idea then, now that you've got the idea, is we want to shift it to this new environment, and it takes a system to do it. So we have founded the National Schoolyard Forest System with California as the first state. And our partners are CAL FIRE, the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, the California Department of Education, and another nonprofit called 10 Strands. And we hope, I say it's the first state in this system, we hope other states will join us. And if you're a state agency somewhere else, please let me know. Love to talk to you. We are aiming to shade and protect pre-K to 12 students across the state by planting schoolyard forests and having that be the norm as a climate oasis, trying to hit at least 30% of the school property. That's what cities aim for. Kids should have the same. Trying to center equity and make them outdoor learning environments and build climate literacy. And to do that, we've done research on where the barriers are, interviews extensively on tree planting organizations and policy barriers and opportunities. We've been advocating, we've been mapping every school in the state, building consensus, and we've been building technical assistance resources, and we'll be doing pilots. So lastly, I just want to direct you to an online resource library that's free, Schoolyard Forest Library, that has all the ideas to, if you'd like to do it and you want to run with it, we're trying to put everything online you would need. That includes a climate adapted tree planting palette for California for assisted migration of forests. And it also includes design guidance about how to think this through. And in closing, I just want to say that land matters. Children's land matters, and we need to use it wisely because it's really scarce. Kids need shade, and now's the time to act, and we hope you'll join us in this important work. And we also have online webinar series that is open and free to the public. Please join us for those. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. As a recovering architect turned climate resilience practitioner, I cannot tell you how many school proposals I've seen that lack this type of intentionality and design thinking as far as the impact of tree canopies and just green areas for children. So I really appreciated that presentation. I'm going to open it up for questions. We'll take one from the audience. I see half a hand going up once, twice. Okay, so we'll have this one question, then we'll take one from the virtual audience.
Hi, my name is Corinne. That was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. I was wondering if there were any sort of before and after studies that kind of look at either your work or similar work and how it affects the public health of the children and other surrounding instances.
There's a great study by Dr. Marcy Rainey from Occidental College in Los Angeles that's a controlled before and after study of a green schoolyard renovation. And it looks at And I think it's the only one to date that's had a control school as well, but she did before, during, and after the renovation, and looked specifically, she was looking for children's health metrics around physical activity and engagement, and saw that, if I remember correctly, that all physical activity rose with the green schoolyard. That girls' physical activity rose more than boys because the girls were formerly standing at the edges while the boys were playing sports and dominating the courts. And so green schoolyards kind of gives you, as I call it, an ecosystem of opportunities of things to do. So the kids who want to play sports can play sports, and the rest of the kids get out of their way and do something else at the elementary level. And they also provide good social environments for older kids to be social in pockets and not have to be on display where it's really stressful to each other. So it tends to improve behavior. And anecdotally, the principal at that same school told me that she thought every teacher had 20 more minutes to teach every day because they were no longer taking the arguments that came in off of lunch recess at the playground and that didn't take up their post-lunch time. They could just get right into teaching because the kids were much happier. That's not part of the study, but it was part of the same project. So Dr. Marcy Rainey, her research is great. Yeah.
Wonderful. And we'll take one from the virtual.
Do you have any money for implementation?
We do. We had a grant. We are 2 years into a multi-decade project, I should say, in California alone, and we're always in need of more money for implementation. But we have been setting up the framework for this system because we believe there are a lot of pieces that need to come together to make it last. And so we're about to stand up on that framework and go into the program mode where we'll be working on pulling together a community of practice hub in the Los Angeles area first with multiple districts who can see each other moving forward on this, and we can help them as a group with district leadership. And we're hoping to, after that one runs, to do different hubs in different places. And are also working to set up a national community of practice for state-level agencies that would like to help make this shift in their state, because like California, it's probably similar everywhere, where the rules and the money flow from the state level and unintentionally the different agencies' rules conflict, making a lot of friction for districts. And so we want to help states get their level of the work organized, and then at the district level support the districts in doing with the pieces that they need. And so we have 2 pilots that we're building this year just as the last piece of our initial grant startup from the California Department of Fire and Forestry. And we're looking at what is the lowest cost model you can do on taking asphalt into forest to do a patch that is a climate oasis. So yeah, but we need more funding, definitely. If anyone knows funders who would love to fund this, we'd love to talk to you. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next, we have Brian Knox from the city of Tampa.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Knox. I'm with the city of Tampa, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about urban heat island effects and some of the strategies that we've used to try to mitigate. And so one of the strategies that we've used is the urban forestry analysis that we created back in 2006. Just to give you a little bit of background of how or why we created an urban forestry analysis, it actually started in council, and it started with developers and tree advocates. And so the question was, how many trees are we losing? And we couldn't provide an answer for that. And so starting in 2005, we began to create the urban forestry analysis. And now it's a 5-year study that we conduct every year. The last one we've conducted was in 2021. And so basically what the urban forestry analysis tells us is how is our tree canopy doing and what are the trends and changes over time. Also, there's other information in there, including ecological benefits and what is happening in the neighborhoods. And we break the canopy down into neighborhoods as well. And so because of that, we had an analysis, but now we needed a management plan. And so in 2013, we created our urban forestry management plan based on our first ecological analysis. And so the urban forestry management plan helped us to provide metrics to see like how are we meeting these goals and are these goals actually being attained. And so that's a little bit of background of the urban forestry analysis. I will skip back a little bit and say for our recent analysis, the 2021 analysis, we included some extra items that we felt were necessary that we were missing out from our urban forestry management plan, and that included a social survey. We really wanted to know from the citizens their perspective of the city of Tampa's canopy. We also included an urban heat map, and so that was the beginning of our process of trying to figure out where the hottest areas are in the city of Tampa. And also within that, we started to look at a very crude version of what it would be like to plant trees in spaces where there aren't any trees. So we looked at it, we had a potential tree planting map that we had created as well. And so I'll go into a little bit more detail in that through this presentation. And the last thing we did was an analysis of environmental equity, where we made some comparisons to see who was impacted the most by the lack of tree canopy. And so with mapping our urban heat islands and just mapping urban heat in general, we used Landsat satellite imagery to measure land surface temperature. And so that was one metric we used. But in order to collect our tree information, we used additional methods as well. We used we collected information on 200 plots, and from there we stratified those plots out to get our canopy percentage over the years. The other thing we use is a dot-based matrix system, or a dot-based system, to determine what's impervious versus what's a tree or tree not a tree. And it's a very simple process that we used with University of South Florida graduate students to get a rough estimate of is the canopy percentage that we're using, is it on par with the satellite imagery. And so moving forward with how does our canopy look in the city of Tampa, one of the things we learned is that, of course, there's a correlation between having a lot of tree canopy and land surface temperature. So of course, the lower the land surface temperature, the more tree canopy you have. And so in conclusion, we can say that the trees are doing their job in the areas where there's the most tree canopy. And so the area up north that's shown on the map here, it's one of the areas where we have the most tree canopy, and it's doing the most work. And so when we get into the center part of the cities, we start to see where things are greatly impacted through development or through historical things like redlining or some other cultural issues that may be associated with trees not being there. And we learned also in those areas that there is room for improvement. And so there are areas where we can focus and target tree canopy a little bit more to increase that percentage. And so that boils down to our neighborhood canopy percentages that we have in our analysis, where we can start to focus on those tree plantings that I mentioned before. And so this is an estimate of our overall tree canopy. So this is the 5-year estimate of how we're doing. And we started out collecting this information, as I mentioned earlier, in 2006, and we were at 31.7%. In 2011, we shot up to 34%. And then from there, we've been taking a dive. And so we now hit that critical threshold of 30%, which is, according to scientists, that's a really critical threshold that we need to maintain. And so our goal is to make sure we don't dip below 30%. And so just to give you an idea of the continuous decline, we're down to 30%, and it's nearly 4 times the area of the University of South Florida's campus. If we were to, if you're not familiar with the campus, that's about 1,600 acres. And so that's a critical moment because it's the lowest canopy, or it's the lowest percentage of canopy that we've had since we've done the study. And so one of the things we're looking to kind of combat the canopy loss and the extremity of heat in the city of Tampa is that we've created partnerships with resilient cities, and we've also worked with the University of South Florida to try to create multiple ways where we can combat extreme heat. My job is to try to mitigate that through trees. And so one of the things we do is we can't do anything without asking the community first. And so that is a big priority for us. That's the way we did our management plan. That's the way we've done our analysis. And it's the way we plant trees in the city as well. It's all demand-based. And so with that, some of the takeaways were that just like most citizens, they feel the heat the most in areas where there are not a lot of trees. And so that included parks and cemeteries and schools, as we talked about earlier, also major roadways. And so looking at that, those are some of the areas that we intend to target. And one of the reasons why we want to target those areas first is, one, because the community said so, and two, because of another part of our survey. We did another survey during our latest analysis, and in that survey, we surveyed 1,100 respondents. We had 1,100 respondents, and with that, they told us essentially that we like trees overwhelmingly, but with that, we don't want to be solely responsible for maintaining them. And part of it's various reasons. Cost is one of them, of course, but just the more information that I've learned that we give the citizens, the less likely they are to receive a tree. So right now we're focusing on public tree plantings while educating the citizens using outreach and education on the benefits of having it on their property. And once that is established, then we will try to focus that a little bit more on private property as well. And so I mentioned a survey where we went to the citizens of East Tampa, and this is the results of that survey. And essentially they said that as of right now, we're okay. We feel like we have the functioning necessities to combat heat at this time. And also in the survey, they mentioned that they would like to have additional amenities and parks that would help create that cooling effect that's needed for a while they're out. They can stay out. You can stay out a little bit longer. And so, with our survey, we did our potential planting sites, and we did an analysis with that, and that's what I mentioned earlier. And with that, we broke the potential planting sites into 5 planting districts. And so we looked at that in a way where we looked at the existing canopy and we looked at what the potential canopy will be. And for that, that's when we're trying to bring it down to a ground level where we can do targeted street tree plantings. And so we want to do this in every community where we can focus on the right-of-way tree plantings first. Hopefully that will engage the citizens, because we're not going to do the street tree plantings without their input. And with that, maybe the benefits of trees will be recognized in the private area as well. And one of the take homes with the private property versus a public tree thing for the city of Tampa is that at one point, 50% of the tree canopy was on private property because we have a private property tree ordinance. And so in this last analysis, that was reduced down to 36%. So the education and outreach is going to be extremely important for us to help increase that canopy, because we can't do it all on the public right-of-way. And so that's my time. If you have any additional questions, I'm available.
So we have about 5 more minutes for this session, and I do want to open it up for the audience. So I will repeat my question, and we'll do 2 from the virtual audience and then 2 from the in-person audience, if you have burning questions.
I'll start with a question from our virtual audience. How have you determined why the canopy percentage is dropping?
We can make some assumptions. Part of it is Tampa's a growing city, so part of it is development. Also, we've had some changes in our state regulation, which relaxes the ability to remove trees on private property. And so with that, it's, and also zoning and our ordinances. We've made some pretty progressive changes to our ordinance to allow tree removal in parcels where we know tree removal pretty much will happen. And so rather than sending someone through a process where we know the tree will be removed, we essentially allowed automatic right of tree removal in the center part of that parcel. What we didn't anticipate was that all of these things would happen at the same time. And so 2019 was a magical year for all of those things to happen. And so because of that, we did suffer some impacts from it in terms of our tree canopy.
Okay, and then quickly, this is coming up from multiple people in the virtual audience. Can you describe a little bit more about the private property ordinance?
Okay. So the city of Tampa has a private property ordinance where if a tree is 5 inches in diameter or greater, you need a permit to request removal. And it's a permit to request removal. It's not a permit that allows you removal. We send our arborists out, they evaluate the tree, and if that tree is allowed for removal based on condition, we will allow you to remove it. If you would like to remove that tree in another capacity, maybe through development, you have a better chance for removing it, unfortunately. But if it's a tree that's a grand tree, which is 32 inches in diameter or greater, you need special permission from city council to remove it.
Okay. And then we'll take one more from the audience. Oh, do we have a mic that we could pass it over? Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
I was just curious, as you're ramping up plantings of trees in the public way, how your city is managing an increased need for capacity for people to do watering and establishment care for those trees.
And so that's thank you for that question. That's one of the things that we struggled with, and it disincentivized tree planting in the past. It's something where we have a program where we will give you free trees. We just want you to be a steward of those trees. And so oftentimes it was either location or access to water that would prevent those plantings from happening. So for a city that has 30% canopy, we have a really low replanting effort that comes from the community or comes from our program that provides free trees. And so what we're looking to do is use funding to change that narrative and also create more avenues where citizens can be engaged and water and remember and do the things that participate in all of us growing our canopy.
Thank you. All right. So give it up for our panelists one more time.